This is Van Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air for the first time. Well, maybe not the first time, but Richard Rosser. And thank you very much for coming back on the show. It's great to have you here on the Van Electric Ghost podcast.
Well, thank you very much, Phantom. We had a couple of misstarts yesterday, and here we are with take three, which is the magic take.
So I want to let
I have
people
a
know
feeling.
we are a featured podcast on the Newsly platform. You can see that icon up there that says listen on Newsly. If you use coupon code GHOST to get 1 month free premium subscription. Again, we're a featured podcast on that platform, so you can stop scrolling and start listening. They actually take video podcasts and convert them to audio. So we'll be on Newsly later today. So we're actually at episode, I believe, with our like 934, right? Episode 934 of the podcast, and we've been around since
Wow.
2016 doing podcasting, and that's tracking on Apple Podcast for that particular thing. And we're just happy to talk to new people all the time. And you are a filmmaker, author, master storyteller, and AI aficionado. We're going to get into all that. But you probably want to, give the brief background to people who don't know who you are. You're a filmmaker, again, master storyteller, but you've been involved in TV shows like Grey's Anatomy, Chicago Med, This Is Us, MacGyver 24. And yeah, we probably want to talk about that before we get into the AI discussion, maybe give people a brief background.
Absolutely. Well, as you said, I've been in the TV business for a number of years. I started out my career in New York way back in the day and was working on music videos, commercials, TV, feature films. And I was doing a lot of traveling, and I had young kids. And I was sort of bemoaning the fact that I was traveling a lot. And the director I was working with said, stop your belly aching. If you want to never travel again, move to LA and get into TV. And so my wife, who was an East Coaster, I said to her, "Hey, this guy suggested we move to LA." And she said, "Sounds good to me. Let's try it." So we moved out to Los Angeles. We've been here just over 20 years, and we absolutely love it. Although I have to say, right now, I don't know when this is going to air, but right now we're in the midst of the writer's strike, and now today is the first day of the SAG strike. So they've sort of combined forces and are striking. Both unions or guilds are striking together. And so it's a bit of a crazy time in Hollywood right now. And one of the big issues that is on the table is AI, which we'll dive into during this
Yeah,
podcast.
musicians, we're kind of tackling with that myself. And like I think what I was talking to you before is I kind of like it as an assistant. And like one of the tools I like to use is like a Roland synthesizers their famous Juno and Jupiters. They've reimagined them, and their reimagined hardware
Mm-hmm.
Jupiters and Junos actually have this AI built into it called intelligent arpeggiator. And what it basically is actually more than an intelligent arpeggiator. If
Oh,
you
right.
actually start to write a song, it will actually look at what you're playing and then introduce a bass line, introduce drums, introduce other
Mm-hmm.
things, and you can kind of control what it's going to introduce. And then as you play faster or slower, or change your chords or change your right and left hand, it starts to change what it gives you, and it will actually record it, and then you can go into it and change it and alter it. And so it kind of gives you a way to start with your music to kind of give you some kind of sketchbook. And it's actually not just like a Casio kind of sketchbook. It's actually intelligently following what you're doing in terms of your speed and your style. And so that's the kind of thing that musicians like, little helpers, like I was talking about other things where you could ask it to do stuff on the mixing board, give you like 30 seconds of a different mix. So you could say, oh, like, I want to check all these mixes before I go to do it and have it run through it, you know. I think you had to deal with your dog. your dog was chiming in. Oh, now we lost your mic for a second. Wait, there you go.
Sorry, my dog was going crazy in the background. Someone knocked on our door,
Yeah,
and
I heard a
so
little
I don't know if you could hear all that, but I was trying to get folks to quiet down since we're live. Well, I have the same approach to AI. Um, to me, AI is really it's a tool, and my analogy is it's really a tool akin to, say, a calculator
Hmm.
for a mathematician or an engineer. And I mean, we can't imagine an
And
engineer would actually
and
build a rocket to, a SpaceX rocket
yeah,
with a pad of paper and a pencil, right? They need a high end calculator or computer program that can help them work through those calculations. And so I think what you're saying, Phantom, with your approach to music is you're using this to enhance your creation,
yeah,
but not to replace your creation. And again, to me, that's the big difference. And so I'm a storyteller, and having worked on all these different TV shows, like you said, I worked on 24 for 8 years. I worked on This Is Us for a number of years, Grey's Anatomy, Chicago Med, the MacGyver reboot, and so I've worked as a storyteller professionally for 30 some odd years, and I've realized the value and importance of storytelling, both from an entertainment standpoint, but when I'm between shows and I end up I'm on hiatus, I've realized the
mhm.
importance of storytelling in everyday life, and how we use story and storytelling to communicate. In fact, can you guess the percentage? There's a statistic. What percentage of our daily communication do you think is story based or
I
storytelling?
mean,
Do you
in
have a
my
sense?
work as a programmer, I'm not sure. I mean, we kind of storyboard things out, so a lot of our stuff is like we walk through use cases where we like I could say we're doing like four
Right,
hours
gotcha.
out of the day doing design. We're actually doing flow charts, and it is kind of storyboarding something out
Okay,
where we actually have an actor. Is that here's like a
right.
CSR, and here's the customer, and here's the accountant, and we're mapping where the data is going. So we're kind of telling a story with the data. So yeah, with our stuff that we do that, and
Right,
in my music,
exactly, exactly.
I'm kind of doing that too. I write lyrics that try to tell stories, or I call sound paintings. So I spend a lot of time between both
Of
sides
course, of
doing
course.
that.
So, well, so the percentage that I don't know who figured this out, but they figured out that approximately 85% of all of our daily communication is through story or
Mhm.
storytelling or some sort of a narrative structure. And I thought when I first heard that, I just went, "Whoa, that seems really high." But when you think about it, everything we do revolves around story. If you and I go out to lunch and we're talking, and you say, "Hey, what'd you do this weekend?"
Oh
It's a
yeah.
story. If I'm working with a team, like you were just talking, one of the best ways to figure out how to overcome a challenge is through a story. Is if I'm managing a team and I tell a story about how I overcame something previous, it's an entree into how we might approach what we're the challenge that we're working on any given day or a project. And so story really serves as a foundation. And if you think about it, we as human beings have been communicating through story for
Yeah.
10,000, 14,000 years.
Wired
And
for
so
that.
our
Yeah.
brains have become wired to understand everything through story. And it's pretty awesome. There's some incredible brain science behind storytelling and why it works. One of the main concepts is called narrative transport. And so with narrative transport, say for instance, you're listening to one of your favorite songs or symphonies, or you're reading a favorite book or watching a favorite movie. Well, you're transported to almost another place, right? You're transported to another world or another little dimension. And so as you're reading this book or listening to this music, the buzzer's going off, your pizza's burning in the oven. There's someone knocking on the door because they've got a delivery, and you don't hear or see or smell any of it because you're so involved. You're transported to this other world through whatever story medium you're paying attention to, and so you're transported narratively, and everything else just falls away. And ultimately, I mean, it's like being in the zone if
Yeah.
you're an athlete, right? It's ultimately what we as storytellers, and again, I use storyteller the phrase storyteller very broadly.
Yeah,
A
like
musician's a storyteller,
Dylan and
composer's a
Springsteen do
storyteller.
the same thing.
Uh, you know, a movie exactly. Oh, of course, of course. Yeah, I mean, their songs are just full of stories and characters and situations and words and phrases that mean things that you go, wait, what does what does that mean? And you dive into it, and there's context. And so I have a love of the creative process and story, and it comes from working for so many years in the TV and film business, but also understanding the value of storytelling
Yeah, I
on an
think
everyday
as
basis.
a musician and as a fan of music, one of the first bands I got into Dylan, and Blonde on Blonde, Highway
Mhm.
61. I'm like, wow, and then the Basement Tapes,
Oh
and then
yeah.
I went and got the 8 hours of yeah
Well,
the
one of my
original
favorites is Blood
Basement
on the
Tapes. I
Tracks,
mean, I
right?
got like 8 hours of him and Robbie and the boys, and I was listening to every
Yeah.
single thing, like Quinn the Eskimo and all that stuff. But so I was listening to all that. But what thing was cool about what he was doing with the band was he's creating this Americana, all these stories. And there's all these stories that some of them sound like they're from the old West.
Yep.
Some of them are about some outlaws. They're about these, Quinn the Eskimo. He creates all these like mini little like movies. Every time I listened to what the band was doing, even when the band
Yeah.
went on their own, they
Well,
were still kind of influenced by Dylan. They told this, yeah, these stories that were just
oh,
incredible.
absolutely.
And as a child of the '70s, I used to like to listen to the whole thing. I would go and listen side A, side B. I would go listen to Pink Floyd,
Mhm.
side A, side B, because to me it was like a sound movie, sound painting,
Oh yeah.
and I was getting drawn into, you know,
Well, yeah, absolutely. So I read somewhere that Dylan used to go to the New York Public Library, and he would go into the archives and he would search the archives. And I mean, this is in the '60s, so within the realm of the '20s and the '30s, but also back before the turn of the century. And he
mm,
would find these
stuff
stories,
came
and that
out.
was where a lot of those sort of, because you talked about how it felt like,
Yeah,
Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid was a movie that he did the soundtrack in, and he was in, but it had that flavor and feel that harkened
yeah,
back to a previous era. And yeah, the stories in songs
yeah.
like that are
It's just
truly
you
truly
go
incredible.
through it and the humor. They he had a lot of humor, and then he has a lot of
Mhm.
he's making all these commentaries, but he's got these layers. Like, and if you get to like, Blood on the Tracks, you get a song like
Oh,
Idiot Wind blowing from the Green Coulee Dam to the Capitol.
yep,
And he goes like, well, he's talking about like a relationship at a micro level, but he's also talking at the macro level about like
oh
politicians.
yeah,
So in the same song, he goes and addresses
yep,
like higher level things, but also personal things. And I always like the way that Dylan kind of weave this thing where he could take like a personal story and then make a social commentary at the same time, like a great writer, because he is a great writer.
yeah. Oh well, yeah. I mean, he's a fan, just unbelievable. And but it's interesting you bring all that up, because when I'm working, because I do a lot of consulting, I work with ongoing businesses, but I also work with startups and founders. And one of the things that I always do is I dive into the founder's story, or the story of where the business came from and why.
Hmm.
Why did it come about? What issue or challenge or problem was there that the business owner or business owners, right, combined some, part A and part B, and came up with
Hmm.
C, D, E, F, G, and H. And that's one of the most interesting parts of doing this, is learning about folks and how they move through the creative process. I absolutely love the creative process, and so that's really ultimately what I'm working to do, is help folks become better communicators through story and storytelling. And a lot of people, it's interesting, Phantom, because a lot of people, when we first sit down and we start working, or if I'm leading a workshop, we'll do a breakout session, and someone will come up and I'll say, okay, go ahead and tell that story that you created. And they say, oh, I'm really not a good storyteller. And I say, it doesn't matter. Just go ahead and
Mhm.
you sort of spit it out. And they'll launch into what we've done in the breakout session, and it's amazing. One of the breakout sessions that I typically do is, have you ever heard of
Oh, I think
Hemingway's
I've heard
six
about it. I mean,
word
I love
story?
Hemingway. I think I remember hearing about it. Bowden.
So so Ernest Hemingway came up with the concept of a six-word story, and so he wrote a six-word story, which was "Baby shoes for
Yeah,
sale,
I remember I heard that
never
Bowden.
worn."
My first
And you hear that, and at first you hear "baby shoes for sale," and you think you envision this tiny little pair of baby shoes, and they're white leather, and then you hear "never worn," and you think, wait, so there's no scuff marks, there's no wear on the tread, they're pristine. Maybe there's an original tag that's in one of the eyelets of the shoelace, and all of a sudden your
Yeah,
mind starts to fill in these incredible
what
details
happened to the baby?
about what happened. Did the Yeah,
Yeah,
what happened? Was the baby never born? Did it die in stillbirth? Was it born but it died in the crib and never was they never put the shoes on? And you sort of think, wow, 6 words. How can 6 words end up being so evocative? And again, our brains are really
yeah,
trained to fill in the blanks of story. And so everyone who hears that starts thinking and then expands upon those 6 words to fill in the blanks, and again based on their personal history. And that's one of the cool things about story is stories really come out of us, right? I mean, just like Dylan had his own personal history, but he went to the New York Public Library, and he'd come up with these stories based on these Western characters, these characters from the 20s, and or Hurricane. I mean, these incredible stories, and he'd fill it in with his own experience. I think that's part of what does what you were talking about, which is this interlayering of layers that work on both a personal standpoint and also an allegorical
yeah,
standpoint of the situation of politicians in America at certain points
yeah. Because he's
in
always
time.
making these statements and have some example of some kid, saying, "Well, I ain't a politician. I ain't gonna be like that politician. I'm gonna be," you just make these, and he just, but
Right.
I don't know. He had a way of weaving all these like levels, like you said. There's like the microcosm. I was like a sociology major, so the idea that anomy, yeah. So the idea of
Oh, you
anomy,
were okay.
you're disconnected, and then
Yep.
you're trying to get connected, and then you got the microcosm, you got the macrocosm, you got Weber, and all these ideas. And being a songwriter myself, and being influenced by guys like Dylan, but also guys like Lou Reed, which I was very much influenced by Lou
Mhm.
Reed because I liked the idea
Oh yeah.
that he was talking about the in '66, with this hippie kind of aesthetic about the dark underbelly of New York. And
Yep.
he's like, and it showing like, oh, people on
Yeah.
heroin, people waiting for the man, people, all kinds of crazy stuff,
Oh,
Venus
crazy,
and Furs.
crazy
He's
stuff.
doing all
Yeah.
this stuff, and it's like, wow, this is a totally different way to think about a song. It doesn't have to be about, oh, my girl left me, but I got done wrong. It's
Right.
a totally different place, and it really did. Really, a lot of artists, became aware of what he was doing, like after the Velvets were gone. But like everybody who listened to the Velvets actually ended up in the in
Oh
the
yeah.
'80s and the '90s, tons of bands like name checked him. From Nirvana to Pearl Jam to like all these big
Oh yeah.
bands said, yeah, I was totally influenced by that, and I used that to be the main driver of what I was going to do as a songwriter.
Well, so Phantom, when you talk about Lou Reed's experiences and Dylan's experiences, there's excuse me, there's a level of detail, right? That and Springsteen, you mentioned Springsteen before. There's a level of detail and a way that those songwriters use phrasing and terminology. And some of it's a code. Some of it's like a cool code. Some of it's a code that they may have had with their friends growing up. I remember a friend of mine. He said, "Okay, so candy is cigarettes, Lifesavers is marijuana. So if I ever say to you, "Hey, you got any candy?" or "Do you have any
Yeah, yeah.
lifesavers?" That's code, because that
We
way
know
my
what you're
mom
talking
will
about.
know
Yeah.
what we're talking about. And I was like, "Whoa, okay." Yeah. And so as you dive into these worlds of the Velvet Underground or Dylan and the band or Pink Floyd,
Your code.
you
Yeah.
learn this lexicon of phrasing. And again, going back to going back to how we connect with folks. One of the really great things about story is our ability to use it to connect. So when I'm working with folks, what I do is I work with them, and we start telling stories, but very just basic stories. And one of the most basic is a joke. And I'm not talking about like set up punchline. I'm talking like a story joke. Yeah. So it might go on for a minute or two, and then you have a punchline, but it's almost like at that point the punchline doesn't matter. The real fun and entertainment experience of that joke story or story joke is in the telling. It's in the physicality of bringing a character to life. It's in the sound effects or the gravelly voice you use for a police officer in the joke or whatever it is. And so we work with telling jokes and tall
Mm.
tales and ghost stories or urban legends. And there's something about digging into, for instance, I've done a bunch of classes with like high schoolers and college age students, and we talk about an urban legend. And urban legends, we talk about, okay, well, what makes an urban legend really work? A lot of them have to do with deep, deep, deep seated fear, and that it's like a universal fear. And so if you can tap into that fear or need or pain point or desire, then you have a really great chance of connecting with your audience. And the more emotion that you can infuse your story with. And again, when I talk about emotion, I'm not talking about, okay, crying, sure, crying or being emotional, but emotion can be joy, it can be suffering, it can be betrayal, it can be, you know, there's so many range to emotion. But you want to connect with folks on an emotional level through your story. And a lot of times that means digging and diving into those details, just like Lou Reed and the Velvet Underground and Dylan and Springsteen. I mean, in those stories, you
Yeah.
can imagine the characters, right? I
Yeah.
mean, they are drawn with
Yeah.
such
The depth is just amazing.
incredible
Like
depth
I was listening to
that
Darkness on the Edge of Town.
yeah,
The Darkness on the Edge
it
of
really
Town title
is.
track. And that song
Oh,
has so many great like
yep,
phrases in it. But it's like you're basically talking about a guy that's kind of at the end of their
it
rope,
really does,
and
doesn't it?
basically like you at some point you're gonna let that darkness eat you up, or you're gonna take it, or it's gonna spit you out. He has all kinds of phrasing, and the idea that you're gonna go to the darkness on the edge of town and find out what's there. Right? It's kind of this mystery that he's gonna go there. They can find me under that
Hmm.
bridge at the edge of
Right.
town. And you find me there waiting for
Well, and
you.
again, right. Again, Phantom, how many levels is that? How many levels or layers is that working on? Right, it's working on the personal layer of, okay, is it, going to a physical place, to the edge of to darkness at the edge of town. And Dylan has similar songs, right? Dead End Street. I mean, there's this physicality of going there personally, but there's also
Allegory, what it means.
the allegory of it, and how it takes on of
Mhm.
in society, right? And it's not
Yeah, it's a
necessarily
mental
just a
place.
physical place. And what, yeah. So what I do is with the 6 word story, before I have folks actually create and tell their own 6 word story, what I do is I tee it up by saying, okay, let's do a breakout session. And I want everyone to write down a sense memory from their childhood, and it just sense memory. And some people come up with, oh, I remember the smell of an apple pie that my mom used to bake. Or one woman said, I remember the feel of my mom rubbing my forehead. And so they come up with a sense memory from childhood. And then I tell them about this 6 word story, that the concept that Hemingway wrote. And then I say, okay, now combine the two. take your sense memory from childhood and this 6 words and create a story based on that memory. And oh my gosh, the power, but the brevity, right? I mean, 6 words to tell this story. And folks come up with this. One guy came up with a story, 6 words. I can't remember exactly the 6 words, but it was about the only time that he and his father ever hugged. And I
Yeah.
mean, I'm talking powerful. And so,
Yeah. It's like
sometimes
like play on
shorter is
play.
better, right? And concise and to the point. Exactly. And so what we end up with is this, and when I'm doing a workshop or seminar, we have limited time. So I'm always looking for a way to shorthand, storytelling techniques. And when I came across the
That's
6 word
magic.
story, I
Yeah.
thought, oh my God, this is perfect. 6 words, you know? And then I thought, well, how can I set it up so that they'll have the foundation for the story? And I thought, oh my gosh, a lot of what we do in storytelling is playing with the senses. And so I came up with that idea. So because before I tried it once without doing the senses, and people they'd spend 10 or almost the entire time just trying to figure out what to write about, not how to
Hmm.
write it with the 6 words, but just what. And so by setting them up with this foundational sense memory,
Kickstarted. Yeah.
it really helps
Yeah. It
them
kickstarts it.
just jump right in with the 6 words. Yeah. And it really gives them a sense. So when they go out and they're starting to craft a story for, and again, a story, it can be beneficial if you're in a job interview, right? Say, for instance, you're interviewing me, and you say, "Richard, are you responsible? Are you punctual?" And I say, "Phantom, yes, I am." Well, okay, that's an answer. And then we move on to the next question. But it's also a possible place for a story. And if I have a story that I've created ready for a job interview, I can say, well, yes, I am responsible. In fact, I work as an assistant manager at McDonald's. And last Friday night, we had a French fry fire, and I had to call the fire department and the manager who had gone home.
Yeah.
And what it does is it tells you and shows you that I am responsible, that I can think on my feet, and that I can communicate on the fly. So when you look at my resume, you write down French fry fire, right? And then a week or two later, when you're trying to figure out which of the 15 candidates you want to hire,
Oh, French
you
fries.
go through and you say, okay, there's a guy with the glasses and red hair and striped shirt and French fry fire.
Yeah.
French fry fire. That, yeah, Richard was able to communicate the whole thing. I can still visualize him rushing to try to get the fire extinguisher. And so what it does is it builds a connection. So we can use story in job interviews,
Yeah. The
pitching
elevator pitch.
projects,
Yeah.
asking for funding. If you can't tell someone a great story about why they should help fund your company,
Yeah.
well, you're not getting the money. And even when you're managing a team. So story is so important for all sorts of layers of leaders, for communication, but also that connection point of connecting with an
Like when
audience. So,
business, in software design, we do like scrum sessions. We do these sessions where we do 15-minute, 20-minute sessions, and
yep.
people just the boss just wants you to do the top 5 things that are important to you today, right? What's the highest
Mhm.
priority items? What are your roadblocks? And it
Right.
can't, there's like 30 people, and we got to go through this thing in like 20 minutes. So you can't be verbose. You have to go boom, 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 and
Right.
immediately try to figure out what your elevator pitch to the boss is to show that you know what you're doing. Right, to show you like, oh, this is the big roadblock. We got a
Hmm.
big
Hmm.
roadblock where we can't do this calc. That getting an ab
Yes.
end. This is the biggest thing because we can't get this code to work. So that's my top item because this is supposed to be done tomorrow, and we're getting an ab end. So that's number one, right? So yeah,
Right.
it's just to learn how to do that elevator pitch. How can you got the CEO in your face in the elevator? What are you going to tell them that shows that you're capable? And I always had this story where I
Hmm.
was selected to work in Japan for 2 years, and my whole family moved there.
Okay.
And the reason I got selected is I actually, was working with this VP, and he said, "Well, how are we going to redesign this system? Everybody's so caught up in what we should do." And I said, "Well, we're going to storyboard it out. We're going to flow chart it. We're not going to write a 100-page document. We're going to
Mhm.
flow chart it out. So if we give it to anybody, they're going to understand it. because I did it that way, they selected me to go to Japan. Yeah, they
in
selected me to
any
go to
language,
Japan
right?
because they
Yeah.
said, "Well, it won't matter
Yes.
if he doesn't know Japanese because he knows how to storyboard this stuff in a logical way." So that's how I kind of thread the needle.
That I love it. I love it. That's exactly my point. I went in for an interview. I worked on a film that Dennis Leary. He had he's a stand-up comedian, but he also had shows on effects. But this was before all that, and he had written it, he was directing it, and he was starring in this film. And I went in uh, to interview his line producer, and it was somewhat complicated because his character lived in an apartment and then looked across a breezeway in New York City and saw other
Mm,
characters. So it had a little bit of the rear window thing
yeah,
going on, right?
okay.
And so it was complicated. You had to have two different apartments that they could see each other. And I said, I just shot at this building downtown that's a loft building, and we could build your set and look across the breezeway to another set. And I basically did the same thing you did. I outlined the whole thing right there in front of him. And I left and got the call 10 minutes later saying, because he had said, I'm interviewing three or four people and you're like the second, right? So I won't be making a decision. I get a call 10 minutes after I left the interview and he said, "Oh, I want to hire you." I said, "Whoa, that was quick. I thought you were interviewing other people." He said, "Yeah, why should I listen to anyone else? You already know how it's going to be done. You got this building you're talking about and everything. You've already got the plan." Just like you, Phantom, you had the plan, which was I mean, it's a fantastic plan because it works in America,
Yeah.
but it also works in Japan because it's visual. And again, that's why I love the creative process. It's taking different viewpoints and combining them, right? You're a musician, I'm a storyteller. We can come together and create something amazing because we have different talents, but our overlap is what, a fingernail or a finger length. And that's what makes creating so
Well, that's been a
fantastic
big
and
advocate
really
for
magical.
some of the corporate America people who are in, the kind of they don't sometimes understand that like the by creative spark when it comes to music, and they say, well, how can you take that and use it in the tech? And I use it all the time. The idea, the creativity of a musician
Of course.
or a writer or a poet, a painter, it's that spark that makes you think of something that's not what everybody else is cloning, and because they have original ideas, and the original ideas aren't always like some cloned thing, and there's so many people want to copy things, and
I love it.
original thought is where you really drive. You have to be a little fearless to put the original thought, because some people, they're scared to put the original thought because they're going to get criticized, and they take it personal. But you got to like let that go, and the creative
Mhm.
person is willing to kind of put that out there even if they get hit. Because it's like, yeah, because you got to be willing to do it.
Yeah. But there's so many overlaps from music to programming to math to storytelling to comedic timing to because if someone, like, I used to do a lot of music videos, and I could tell when someone was a musician but they were a camera operator, or I could tell when someone was a musician but they were an electrician and they were doing a follow spot, because there's a certain way that they move and that they're approaching what they're doing, there's a sense of timing there. So this is a perfect little segue to the fact that, so I've been working for the past couple of years, working with schools and entrepreneurs, startups, and existing businesses with the whole concept of story and storytelling, and how important it is and how powerful it is in terms of communication and connecting. And then back in January, I was working on a program for a tech school, and I came across ChatGPT, and I fell in love with it. Now, I use it, when we sort of talked about this a little bit before, I use ChatGPT as a tool. I use it for brainstorming, outlining, organizing, research, but you have to
What it
be
gives you.
very careful, because it can start hallucinating and give you some legal cases that don't exist, as one attorney found out when he was trying to argue in court, and then some basic content creation. But ultimately, and you said this before, you said ultimately it's not about the fact that you're a musician and you're in the tech world. It's about that you're a
Yeah.
creator and you're in the music, you as a musician in the tech world. And so my approach to using AI in general and ChatGPT or Bard in specific with story and storytelling is as a tool, and I view those tools through the eyes or lens
Hmm.
of a storyteller. I'm not a programmer. I'm not a coder. I don't pretend to be or claim to be. And so my approach to using these tools is very different from what yours might be. And of
Yeah,
course,
yeah.
there's some overlap, obviously, but I'm approaching it from how I use these tools to think outside the
Yeah, it's kind
box
of blue sky.
creatively.
I mean, I like,
And
yeah,
I think there are a lot of people out there who are really, yeah. Well, there are a lot of people out there who are just anxious beyond belief. Now, some of them are anxious,
yeah.
excited, but
Well,
some
they're
of them are
scared,
anxious
scared
with
at the
doom and
point they're
gloom
going to get,
because they
they think
think,
it's
oh my
going to take
gosh,
the job away.
this technology,
You know, it's like, kind
right?
of like in music. I mean, there's a point where sampling
Exactly.
created a whole new era, right? And a lot of funk artists and a lot of soul artists were kind of ticked off because of,
Oh, absolutely,
yeah, but then they had to get
completely.
clear
Yeah,
the sample. So once they cleared the sample, if they owned the music, they owned the master, they had to get paid. Problem was a lot of those funk guys didn't own their masters. But like once you resolve the fact that, like, okay, if you have digital rights management and you actually are the original artist and something uses it, you know the lawyers are going to figure out that somebody's going to get paid, and it's probably who owns the master and owns the copyright, owns the patent. That's going to happen, in my opinion, because that's how it all gets worked
true.
out.
Exactly.
But the automation always, some, if you have an artisan, and then Henry Ford comes along, you had cars that were totally hand built, and he goes and creates the automation. Well, that got rid of
Mhm.
some of that, right? But
Yep.
then Ferrari still builds stuff by hand. There's
Yes.
still companies that build stuff by hand. There's still people who do hand built stuff. So
Oh,
your
sure.
skill set doesn't actually become out of phase. Companies like Moog, they build synthesizers by hand, but Roland builds them in a mass production. So there's still companies like Sequential Circuits, they'll build stuff by hand. So there's still places in the modern world today, 2023. There's synthesizer companies, guitar
Yes.
manufacturers, and
Exactly.
instrument manufacturers that still do by hand because there are people that want it. So to me,
It's a
those
great.
artisans will still find a
Yeah, it's
way
a
to
great
be more
example.
boutique, and maybe they'll be their own business, and they'll find their own way. But yeah, it's going to displace some people, but you have to just kind of open to anything that comes along. It wipes things out. To a certain deal. They wipe the old way out. And then the new way.
It it does, but also, and I think the Henry Ford example is a great example, Phantom. It also opens up possibilities
Yeah,
for
customization.
new avenues. And one of the things I think that there are a lot of people who are afraid that that AI and ChatGPT are going to really just turn us all into mindless robots, and that all of our communication is going to be reduced to mush. And sure, so think about this scenario. If you have a prompt that you've written and you write a blog post and you go, "Oh, Richard, check out this prompt I wrote." And I take it and I write a blog post and I pass it on to two or three of my friends and they pass it on to all of a sudden, we got hundreds of people using the same prompt. Well, everything may sound very similar or in fact the same, even though we may be writing about different subjects for our blog posts. But now, because I'm creative and you're creative, if you give me a prompt and I'm creative, I'm going to say, you
Tweak
know
it.
what,
Yeah,
I'm
do
going
your
to
own thing.
infuse that
Yeah,
prompt with a bit of my own personality, right? And so I'm going to take your prompt and I'm going to say, okay, infuse it with some energy and some humor and some pop culture references, or however I want that the flavor and feel of the ultimate response from ChatGPT. And so I'm going to create my own version of that prompt that allows me to amplify my creativity and really let my individuality shine. And so to me, that's the beauty and the wonder. Yes, there will be hordes of folks
cloning.
who just use crappy, crummy prompts, just like there are tons of people who eat McDonald's or Burger King, 2 or 3 meals a day, months at a time. but But there are also going to be people who take this technology and use it to just fly and
Well,
soar.
yeah, I think it's like I said, there's a way to use this stuff, and I see it like on Instagram. In Instagram, you get people get like a billion hits because they're all using the
Hmm.
same 30 seconds for the cat. They're using this 30-second music clip, right? And everybody's using the same music, but it's for the cat video, it's for the model video, it's for the weird prank video, but they're all using the same song because that songwriter, whoever owns the song, is trying to push that song, and then everybody sees that if they use it, they get hits. That's where you get this kind of cloning thing. We get and eventually it kind of runs its
Right.
course because people's like, I'm getting sick of hearing that 30 seconds on every single post got the same song. So
Exactly.
being a songwriter, like I look at that as like, I'm never gonna use that. I'm sorry. Even if I want to get a bunch of posts, I'm gonna probably use my own song because I can write my own song. So I'm not gonna do that. And they go, oh, you should use
Sure.
this. It's like, well, I'm not really gonna do that because that's not my point what I want to do. But I understand, that's where you get the cloning and the lack of individuality and people just jumping on the game, bandwagon. But you do have the ability, like I said, with Roland's technology, it's what you're playing as a musician. The AI adjusts to you, and there's nobody like you. So anytime you record it, it's not going to sound the same.
Right.
So that kind of use of AI is very creative.
No, 'cause
Yeah, it's very creative.
it's ducking and weaving what
It's
you're
the same
creating.
idea.
Right.
Yeah, it's the same idea what you're talking about. You
That's
could use the
fantastic.
chat GPT and be in a very creative mode and have it enhance what you're doing. You still wouldn't really be recognized as the same thing over and over, because you're doing something different. You're using it to help your spark you, to spark an idea, right?
Well, Phantom, it's interesting. You just used the word enhanced, and so I've created a term, AI enhanced storytelling. And to me, I thought about other words, and none felt right. But enhanced, it's because I'm going in and I have a certain viewpoint. I have a certain idea, concept that I'm looking to get out of ChatGPT. And when I put a prompt in, I'm using that to enhance that concept, enhance that idea that I have. And so when it spits out the other end, I may look at it and say, okay, we're 60% there, 80% there, 95% there. But ultimately, I, as the human being, I have the critical capacity to analyze what comes out, and I'm the arbiter of
Yeah,
whether it's
right. Yay
good,
or nay.
bad, or
Yay or nay.
ugly, and whether or not it works. Exactly. And again, that's the main thing. And I hear you saying your version of it when you're writing music, which is you're going to write what you write, and you're going to use. I mean, you may ultimately drop
I
that
might pull
bass
it out.
track out
You get it's tracked
that
out.
the
It's
Roland
tracked
put
in. Yeah,
in
I might not
and
like
put
it.
in your
So yeah,
own, or you may use a part of it,
yeah.
right? Or you may do a variation on that theme
I
and
might
come up with
invert it.
something
I
that's
might
maybe a little
take
bit
it.
more
I might
complicated, or
take what
even
it gave me and
a little bit
invert
more.
it. I might
Yeah,
take it and throw it in a different key. I might take it and
yeah.
slow it down to 1/4 or speed it up
Mhm.
7/8. I might make different decisions, but it gave me an idea that I didn't have. It's kind of like, people purist,
Yes,
like when Dr.
exactly.
Robert Moog came along in the 50s. He came with the first analog synthesizers. All these traditional
Mhm.
musicians in New York said, "There's no way that that's music." They were yelling at him, saying he was like a
Mhm.
Judas, like they said to Dylan. Said, "How could you bring this big machine in and say this is a piano? This is not.
Of course.
This is garbage, right?" So, but then when they did like Hooked on
Right.
Bach with his Moog when that came out, and they actually
Mhm.
realized that that when the person who wrote that had to go in one note at a time to build that and layer it and layer it. They started to realize the artistry that what you could do with it. And then jazz musicians like Sun Ra and other musicians started using it. And then they started, guys like Keith Emerson started using it to show what you could do. Then they start, oh, now today people look at those
Yeah.
Moogs and say, well, that's a real music, the real instrument. But when they first showed up on the scene, they were yelling like when Dylan went electric at the folk festival and saying, "You're a Judas, you're terrible,
Oh, totally.
Yeah, it's the same kind of
Especially when
thing
he
to
went
me,
over to England.
potentially.
Yeah. Yep. In fact, the very first time I saw Dylan, I had sort of grown up on all of his acoustic stuff, and I saw him, and he was electric, and I was screaming the same thing. You're not Dylan. You're an imposter, right? And it was the same thing people had been screaming in England, and it was a trip. Because he was playing
What is
songs, and I
that?
go, "What the heck song is that?" And you realize, oh, it's in a different key, or it's time frame or a time he
Yeah,
loves to
yeah.
mix stuff up. He loves to mess with his audiences
Yeah, I
and his
remember
band
because
members.
I've got some of that stuff like on tape, and it's like
Well,
really interesting because at the beginning of Dylan, he's like channeling Arlo Guthrie and Woody Guthrie. He's kind of channeling, he's kind of mimicking them,
oh
and
yeah.
then suddenly he finds this nasal voice that's not that. It's not Woody. It's not Arlo. It's not any of the people he
Mhm.
was hanging around in New York. He's hanging around all these musicians in New York. If you ever see the movie, the documentary that Scorsese did, he was hanging around all
Yeah.
these musicians, getting influenced by tons of
Going
people.
back, yeah.
And then suddenly, yeah, then he finds this
Dave
voice
Bronk and all
that's
those
uniquely
guys.
his. And then he goes like electric, and it becomes this variation that the folk people are like, that's garbage. you know, but people started to recognize like you found this new thing.
Pete Seeger, Pete Seeger, yeah, Pete Seeger. Rumor has it almost took an axe to the power cable. I think at the
Yeah, it's like that's
Film
terrible.
Festival.
It's like
Well, so as I was working through this process of taking my storytelling workshops and seminars and my approach, and all of a sudden now I've got this new tool with ChatGPT that helps me brainstorm and organize and outline. I realized, oh my gosh, I can fuse the two. And so that's when I came up with this concept of AI enhanced storytelling. And and again, I'm not a programmer, but I thought, oh my gosh, there are so many people out there who are really anxious and confused about this technology and what it can do and what it can't do. And so I wrote a book called ChatGPT Simplified that's written in very simple terms. It's got a lot of humor. It's got a lot of pop culture references. In fact, one whole chapter approximates our journey learning about AI and ChatGPT, just like Alice in Wonderland
oh
took a
yeah,
dive down the rabbit hole and ended up in Wonderland with the Cheshire Cat and the Mad Hatter and the Red Queen and everything. So it's a really fun read. But I took all the jargon out. I took all the tech terms out so that everyone can understand. Instead of prompt engineering, when someone hears prompt engineering and
you're like,
they're not
what's
a
that?
mathematician or an
Yeah, they don't
engineer,
want that.
they want to run away. Prompt engineering. I'm not an engineer. So I call it crafting a prompt or writing a prompt. And so it's really a fun read, and it really helps people get up to speed in terms of the possibilities of using this new technology in all areas of their life, personal, business, whether you're a freelancer or an entrepreneur or a small business owner. And it really has a lot of ideas, and it's a real sort of creative catalyst to help people harness this new
Yeah,
technology for
it's like
whatever
I
they're
said,
doing.
like at the beginning of when music, when samplers came out, and people just clone things, right? And then you had
Mhm.
people like De La Soul, or you get the Bomb Squad. You get these producers that learned how to sample, kind of like if you think about it, they did the wall of sound type of sampling. You had producers that figured out how to
Yeah.
creatively layer the samples like a painter and create what I like to talk about, even that George Martin
Mhm.
talked about and Hendrix talked about is sound paintings. When people asked Hendrix about Electric Lady, he kind of talked
Yes.
about it in sound terms of sound paintings. And the same thing George Martin talked about, like Sergeant Pepper's. Like I could record the Beatles like an expressionist painting rather than having them play live. You can actually not
Absolutely.
replicate your live performance,
Yeah.
but do something that what you couldn't do. I mean, that's what happened in the 60s. The studio became part of the process. It became a canvas to do things that you couldn't do, like Pink Floyd. All their field recordings and layering and all this interesting stuff they started doing is not something you could
Oh
do
yeah.
live.
Because
You did it in the studio.
Right. Before that, bands would perform and perform and perform, and they go into the studio to capture the sound of what they did on the stage. But you're right,
Yeah.
the studio became a lab, right? It became an artist space where they could mess
Backwards.
around
Yeah.
with sound, play things forwards, backwards, at different time frames, and it became a place of creativity instead of just a
Yeah. I think
place
ChatGPT
to
gives you that
document.
opportunity potentially
I,
with
but
other
but
things.
if exactly, yep. But if you think about again, another breakout session I do when I'm, because I do some workshops for tech folks, and I work to help tech folks learn how to tell stories, because a lot of times tech folks, they
Acronyms.
get caught up in the terminology and the jargon, and they and yeah, and they don't realize that they need to somehow translate that for the people that they're telling a story to, so that their audience can really enjoy it. And so what I do is, one of the breakout sessions, I take a technical description, and one of the ones I use is a technical description of Beethoven's Fifth, and it starts off, it's like 50 words, right? So it's very short, but it says, okay, this is a symphony for a large orchestra in four parts. The first part, scherzo, is in A flat minor with a repeating
Yeah. They
motif.
get lost. They're like,
Well,
they
people
don't
are
know music
lost,
theory.
they
So
have
they're
no idea what I'm reading.
like,
And I right, and I jokingly say, hey, who I have an extra ticket to go see this show tonight, who wants to go see it with me? Crickets. And I say, why not? It's boring. It sounds boring. It doesn't make any sense. So I say, okay, well, hold on. Let me read a different account. And I write an account that is AI enhanced, right? That I wrote and AI enhanced it. And it starts off, I'm sitting in the theater or the hall, and all of a sudden, four notes play, bum, 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 bum. And then they repeat, bum, 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 bum. And then it goes into a light, airy part. And then on and on. And then at the finale, then the audience is up on their feet for a standing ovation for a minute and a half or 2 minutes. And I say, okay, who wants to go see
yeah,
it? And
it
every
was more
single
real.
hand shoots up, right?
Yeah.
And I say,
It's
okay,
more
what was the
accessible.
difference? And they say, well, in the second version, I was sitting right there next to you, and I was experiencing this symphony as you were explaining it. And so it transforms a very technical explanation into an experiential version of it. And so what it does is it allows the audience to connect with the storyteller on a very base level. So it goes back to what you were saying about creating creating things in various mediums that exist, music existing as a painting, right? It's so we don't just have to think, and that's one of the reasons you're so successful as a software programmer or a project manager or whatever your actual title is, right? Because you're able to take your musical skills and harness those and help use those to translate and affect what you're doing from a technical
Yeah.
or
I mean,
technological
I'm in
standpoint.
a role
It's
that's
it's
a
it's
middle ground role that was
fascinating.
created back when I started because programmers continually had problems with communication because they're mathematicians and they're very logical, right? So what they did is I'm called a business system analyst.
Yes.
And a business system analyst usually comes from the background from a liberal arts
Hmm.
background. I went to Bowdoin. I have a sociology and government legal studies dual
Right.
major. I'm not a programmer, but I like programming as a hobby. So programming was a hobby. I never took Comp 101, but I did it. I used to hang around with a bunch of
Mm.
hackers and figured out how to do it for fun. I did it for fun, right? But I can write like theses, I can write research papers, and so the BSA is this role where I can go talk to the C-level people and explain to them in a user story what the program is doing so they can understand it. But then I also can talk to the programmer because I know what the COBOL does. I can actually write some of that. So I'm the in between guy. And to me, like the Chappy GPT is
Yes.
kind of like me. It's that BSA that can go in and translate to multiple levels and
Hmm.
people who don't understand, like the high level people, and then the people maybe that don't are not high level, but they're all in the middle and they all need to communicate. I facilitate the communication. So it seems like ChatGPT is kind of like that
Yes.
facilitator.
Oh man, this is fantastic. I love all this. And it is a creative process, right? As you're moving through the process, you're creating and you're helping folks understand again through story what the heck's going on. I mean, I loved how you said you translate. You're a translator, but you're more than that, right? You absorb and translate, and you help filter everything that the programming team is doing, again through a lens that folks on the outside can understand. And again, in an organization, uh, that's another way that story is so powerful. Every organization has different departments. You've got R&D, you've got production, you've got machines, you've got manufacturing, you've got the sales folks, and the end user. And it's really important for the folks in R&D to hear the stories from the end user, because ultimately, if if they miss something or miss an opportunity for the end user to be able to use this product in a certain way, that's money left on the table. Or conversely, if they hear that an end user is using their product in a way that they didn't really mean for it to be used, then they can incorporate that. I mean, like, back to your story about synthesizers, and I mean, originally they you only had
Yeah, my
one oscillator,
polyphonic,
so you
yeah.
could play one
Yeah,
note,
they're
or three
polyphonic.
oscillators. All you could play was three notes. You couldn't, yeah, you couldn't play chords necessarily. You could program it to sound like chords, but it's a different way of using equipment. And when you get those stories flowing between departments and up, and when I work with these career tech schools, we talk about using story. And when I first go in, we're talking about story, and they think, oh, well, we just need you to meet with our marketing department, because that's what they do, is they tell stories to get students to come to our school. And I say, no, 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 it's much more layered than that, because ultimately we want students to come to the school, we want to tell stories about the school, but we want faculty to use story and embed the use of storytelling into the teaching of their programs. And we want students to fulfill their assignments through the use of story and get used to story and pitching, because when they get out, whether you're in the culinary arts or you're a programmer or you're an animator, you need to understand how you can use story
Yeah.
within your own little domain, your arena, so that you can approach clients and move through the creative process of creating whatever
I'm a big
your
believer
strengths
in the
are.
Socratic method. I went to Bowdoin, right? And so we had blue
Oh,
book test. At the end of
mhm,
every final exam,
right,
there was not just a bunch of multiple choice. We had to, in a blue book, tell our
right.
professor, did we really understand what he'd been telling us all semester? We had to kind of tell that story. In every level at Bowdoin, you
Hmm.
wasn't just a multiple choice. It wasn't just yes and no. It was you had to explain in a story, as in a blue book. And I think that
Hmm.
methodology is like lacking in some modern society because they just want to put you in an SAT type of structure, and it's right or wrong without understanding
Yeah.
how to
Oh, definitely.
actually. Can you show that you really understand this? Can you actually tell everything you learned in your own words and actually, really have a debate, more of a debate type of, and actually make an argument like a lawyer and actually win the case?
Well, ultimately,
Yeah, that's what it
ultimately,
is.
Fannin, isn't that what real life is? Right? Real life,
Yeah,
yeah, real life isn't just a true or false, or a pick multiple choice from 1 to 5 or A to D. I mean, real life is figuring out. It's interweaving our knowledge and experience to solve problems, and it's. I love teaching with the Socratic method. I'm forever sort of playing dumb in my workshops or my seminars, and letting the participants come up with the answers, because it's much more powerful if someone comes up
yeah.
with the answer
Yeah, and it
themselves than
shows
if I
you
tell
actually
them the answer.
understood it,
You know
that
that
you
better
can
than me,
apply
right?
it. You actually can be critical thinking that you actually can have a generation of people
Yes.
that are can solve a problem, can actually look at something and argue it either way. Right? I was taught in some of my government classes to argue
Right.
one one ideology over the other, and say, okay, take the other side and make that argument. Take
In
this side and
debate,
make that argument.
yeah,
We were like, you can't just stay on one side. You had to learn how to deal with it all, and even the gray areas, and that's the whole thing.
yeah. Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's just fantastic.
I
The
did.
way to learn to me.
I yeah. I did. Our school I went to, the high school, it wasn't big enough to have a debate team, so I did what's called extemporaneous speaking, and so you'd get half an hour. They'd give you a topic, and you'd have to write a 3 to 5 minute speech on that topic, and they'd give you a point of view. So it was sort of a junior debating sort of thing, and it's invaluable, and ultimately, that's that's what the power and the value of story is it enables you, and going back to the example of a job interview, right? It enables you to wow that person in such a way that they can envision you or me in this scenario with
Mhm.
the French fry fire. And it's a connection that stays with that person. And ultimately, we talked about narrative transport. Ultimately, when I tell a story, whether it's one person or an entire auditorium or hall filled with folks, I'm looking to connect with them. At the end of that story or speech, my hope is that someone will come up and say, "Oh my gosh, I saw what you were talking about, and I'd experienced that from a different viewpoint, or I never considered the that
Mhm.
the way that you presented that." Or it's, wow, I never thought about going down that path as opposed to the path that I'm currently on. And so to me, that's really the value of story. It's being able to communicate ideas and concepts, persuade, entertain, and entertain at the same time through story. That
But
just
yeah,
it's
I
so
think
much
any
fun.
tool that helps you
And
do that, whether it's
yeah,
like
it's
the 6 words, that end up being, to write a story, or just
Mhm.
the idea of, like, I use frameworks like user stories, and you know, it's different special types of, like, flow
Right.
charting, activity diagramming, we call it. But yeah, it's just an
Hmm.
idea that to any type of technology. I started in a COBOL world. Now we're in a blockchain world. I've had to learn. I have to know what I
Right.
don't know, and then I have to rebuild stuff that doesn't exist.
Yeah. Oh,
Right.
absolutely.
So we get people coming back to us and, well, how long is that going to take? Well, it never existed before. So we got maybe a roadmap of what it took to do this, but that was COBOL. This is blockchain, or this is COBOL, or this is
Hmm.
.NET, or this is something else. Each one of those things is a different paradigm, a different structure. It takes different time to do different things. Some things are faster, some things are slower, so based on
Hmm.
whatever you're doing. And so it's always like, moving forward, you have to have tools like the calculator. Like, you can't do a lot of engineering without very advanced, powerful computers to try to number crunch what are the loads on that bridge going to be when the wind hits it, when the water hits it. You got to run through supercomputers to figure out, is that going to be strong enough? What's the load? Yeah, load,
Right. When winter comes and you have the expansion and
yeah. You
contraction,
load
and
test
I mean
stuff for
everything,
users.
right?
Like, what happens if a
And
million people hit this server?
yeah.
Can it go and recover and go and split
Yes.
the load out to a bunch of other servers, or did you not think about that? And so then if it hits, it's just going to crash.
Or what if right? What if
Yeah,
8 billion people want to
it
buy
blows
Taylor
up. It
Swift
doesn't have a
tickets,
way
right?
to go. There are ways to build algorithms that when they get loads, they spread it, right? And there are other ways where you didn't conceive that, so
Of
you didn't
course, of
build it to
course.
do that, so it just dies.
Ah, and Phantom. Okay, so that is one of the cool things about ChatGPT is it helps you figure out what you don't know. Because ChatGPT, as you probably know, I mean, it's trained on billions and billions of pages and text and PDFs and doctor's theses and doctoral dissertations and master's theses. I mean, it's trained on billions of documents, And so when you have that at your fingertips and you're working through an idea or a concept or a program that you're working on, it can help you think outside the box or bring up points that you never would have thought of before. And that's one of the real benefits to this new technology is I can be sitting in my little room creating, but I have a mathematician and a scientist and a philosopher and a musician right with me that can help point some things out in terms of expanding or issues that might come up. Like you said before, if you got a million people on a server, how can you work to alleviate the pressure that's being put on that system? And yeah, it's so. I mean, that's ultimately what I'm all about right now is taking the sort of, if you will, the old analog version of story and storytelling, and taking the digital version of story and storytelling, which is now ChatGPT, and merging the two so I can get the
Yeah, it's kind of
best
what I
out of
do.
both
Like
of
in
those
my
worlds.
toolkit in my studio, I have my Moogs, and then I have
Yes,
my
exactly.
DAW type of machines that are digital audio workstations. And I've got DAWs that have controlled voltage connections that can connect to my old 70s stuff, my old 1960s stuff. And so I have a way that I can
Hmm.
have. So what I always say this idea is you do what serves the song, right? So the song needs a Moog, then it needs a Moog. But if
Hmm.
it needs a granular digital synthesizer, which is a more modern type of synthesizer, it's totally digital. Well, yeah, I need that granular system, or I need a sample to be able to grab me breaking a glass and then
Hmm.
clipping it up and then putting it into my thing, or throwing a bar
Right.
onto a piano and then recording that and then sampling it and bringing it in. There's To me, like, you can use both. You can use all of it. You can use the analog,
Hmm.
and so there's some people who are
Absolutely.
purists that use one or the other. It's like, no, you use whatever serves the song. So you think about, you translate to what you're talking about. If your story or your project, your writing needs this extra tool, like, we didn't have word processors. We didn't have Word. You had to use a typewriter. I was like, when I went to
Right.
school, I still had a typewriter. And then suddenly it shifted that,
Oh
oh,
yeah. So
you can use Word Perfect. I was like, oh, I can use Word Perfect. I actually had an electric typewriter that I had brought to my dorm. And then they were told that we could use these Macs and
right.
stuff. And I'm like, oh, I can use that. And so I guess I don't need my typewriter. But I was still kind of half the time using the typewriter and half the time going in a thing because I was used to typing. I actually learned how to type. So it's like, yeah, there are probably some people that want to still use a typewriter, but you're probably going to use the word processor. It's like, what, you just choose to do what you're going to do.
There are. Danielle Steele. I read an article. Yeah, I read an article about Danielle Steele, and she uses like some 1944 Remington, and she said she has 20 of them in a
She just likes to
closet
do.
for parts because it's a very it's a very fickle
Yeah, but
machine.
this like some people's approach is like, they want to be on a real Steinway, and other people would use a sample digital modern piano and say, well,
Hmm.
there's no difference, I can use it. And other people would say, well, no, I want that Steinway, or I want that German piano, grand piano, because they were looking for that tone. And then and then they might use 808s or
Hmm.
drum machines or whatever. You use whatever you need to use, and it doesn't have to be one or the other. It can be like all of the above. And that's where I think people get into these camps and they say, well, I hate AI, never going to use AI. Like everybody hated, like a lot of musicians hated samplers, or they hated the DX7, or they hated the Juno, or they hated the Jupiter, and then they end up using it. Like, why? Because,
Hmm.
well, it becomes the thing.
And I think that is part of the whole media hype around, that surrounds the media buzz that surrounds this new technology, AI and ChatGPT. And I say new technology, but AI has been around since the 50s and it started in the late 40s. So AI has been around, but we just didn't realize that we were using it. In fact, we use AI every day
Hmm.
when we talk to Siri or Alexa. That's driven by, and when we go into Amazon or Netflix and we're looking for a product or a movie or TV show to watch,
your Google
that's AI
page,
that
your Google
suggests
page that you
possibilities.
individually
Uh,
see, is based
It,
on everything you do, and everybody's page is different. When you walk into it, when you
yes,
open it, your page is not like
yes,
everybody else's page. It is based on what you're doing. And so everybody's
correct.
page actually looks different based on whatever they do.
And, and
Yeah,
Phantom,
they
how
just
about those
follow
ads that
you.
follow you around, right? You go on and you're looking for, I don't know, you're looking for a toothbrush or some slippers, and you buy it, and then for the next week, you see images of toothbrushes or slippers,
I
and you're
already
like,
bought
guys,
it.
come on. Isn't the AI, isn't the program smart enough to know that I actually
It'll
bought it?
get
You don't have
better.
to keep
Pretty
trying to
soon it will
advertise
know that
me.
you'll know you
But
bought it and it will disappear because they know they sometimes they're overdoing it.
yes,
Like in the '70s, you keep on seeing that Ajax commercial
yeah.
over and over and over. It's like, well, now I'm not going to buy it
Hmm.
because you're taking me off.
Well, you think that you're taking that, but then you go into the store
I guess
and you
I
see
am going to buy it. I
Ajax,
guess
and
I'm
it's
gonna.
like, oh, Ajax, and you reach for it, and you're like, wait a second,
Yeah, you say you're not going to buy it, but then you buy it, so that's why they keep on throwing it up because it's like okay. But yeah, this has been a yeah. So I
know
mean, this is
something
a
about this,
great
right?
conversation, and I think a lot of people are they have their own opinion, and yeah, as things happen, like you said, you're using your iPhone, you're using your iPad, you're on your PC, you're dealing with it. Your car company's probably taking data off of
Right.
your car. You don't even know. And some of the cars are learning how you drive and changing the mapping of your throttle without you even
Yeah,
knowing. So it's already happening in your car. So
yeah,
it's like, it's like, so stuff like this is already in play.
it is, and we don't even, yeah, some we don't even know about. Well, Phantom, I have a little challenge for your listeners or viewers. If I can take a moment
Yeah.
and just lay this out, what I'd love for everyone to do is over the next day or so is as you live life, stop and reflect on how you live in story and how you communicate through story, or how your friends and coworkers and colleagues, how they communicate with you through story. And stop and reflect on that as you're living life. And also think about the fact that our stories aren't always just verbal. I mean, obviously, Phantom and I, we've been talking up a storm here on this podcast, but sometimes stories are just visual, or sometimes stories are just oral,
Oh
but
yeah.
but
Like the silent
nonverbal.
films.
But also other stories are simply in our head. Yes, and my wife and I call the head stories grinding. When you've got an issue or a challenge or a problem, and you're grinding. You're just going through the possibilities, and oh, this could happen, that could happen. This is definitely the worst thing's going to happen. So I'd love for everyone to just sort of check yourself over the next day or so and consider how you communicate through story, and how folks communicate to you through story, and how you communicate to and with yourself about what's going on in your life, how you make up stories, you catastrophize, a situation, or you're able to make it positive and build yourself up and rewrite the story as you're living it. So consider that and think about how important and valuable story and storytelling are from a communication standpoint, and how you can become a better
Yeah, I think that's a
communicator
great
through story.
challenge. I think as a songwriter, I mean, I'm always trying to get better at that because every song I write is still kind of story based. I try to have that tradition. But yeah, I
Yeah.
want everybody to remember that the link we have up, AIexplain.ai, will be fully clickable when it's published. And just hang a bit after we leave because this has to finish saving the file that we're recording. But yeah, that's fully clickable on all the platforms. We're gonna have a landing page that we'll send to your all of your the audience tomorrow. But we have been on Facebook and YouTube and Twitch live. I will send you those links immediately, the Facebook and YouTube, so your fans can go back and check that out before they get it on all the other platforms like Spotify and
Fantastic.
Apple and iHeartRadio and those places that we are. But yeah, the landing page will allow people to listen or watch wherever they want to, and so that will be available tomorrow. But thank you for being a guest on the Family Electric Ghost podcast. But do hang a bit in the green room because we have to finish the final recording.
Well, Phantom, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. It's been great being on your show. Appreciate it.